So you're a PT or PTA grad who's feeling the spark of something more. Maybe you dream of building your own business, one that's constructed around your vision, one that empowers you to make a real difference on your terms. This feeling, it's the entrepreneurial itch, and you're not alone. Countless PTs and PTAs are taking the leap to entrepreneurship, crafting careers that are as unique as they are. Welcome to the Innovate and Rehabilitate, the Entrepreneurial PT podcast. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of PTpreneurship with inspiring physical therapists and physical therapist assistants just like you who are crushing it on their terms. We'll uncover their secrets, their struggles, and the incredible impact they're making. From building your PT boss dreams to navigating the business side of things, we'll equip you with the knowledge and inspiration to turn your vision into reality. So, whether you're just curious about starting your own business or you're already out there making your dreams a reality, this podcast is for you. Get ready to unleash your inner entrepreneur. Let's do this.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Entrepreneurial PT. I'm your host, Derek Lee. Today's guest is Rachel Brown, founder of Golden Recruiting and a physical therapist with more than 10 years experience. After spending years working directly with patients and therapy teams, Rachel transitioned into healthcare recruiting with a mission to help organizations hire clinicians and leaders who are the right long-term fit, not just fill positions. Through Golden Recruiting, Rachel partners with clinics, hospital systems, and therapy organizations nationwide to recruit physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech-language pathologists, and executive leaders. Her track record includes placing regional directors, clinic directors, vice president of operations, CEOs, and therapists across outpatient, home health, and skilled nursing settings. What makes Rachel's approach unique is that she understands healthcare from the inside out. Having been in the trenches herself, she knows the realities of caseloads, documentation demands, patient expectations, and team dynamics. That clinical background allows her to connect with candidates as a peer rather than just another recruiter. Golden Recruiting is built around real clinical context, conversational first outreach, and clear communication, and hiring process designed for retention and long-term success. Rachel, thank you so much for being here and welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. I'm super excited to chat a little bit about your work with your company, Golden Recruiting, but also just talk about you as an individual and how you kind of got to where you are, and really what motivates you and stuff every day. So I think, first and foremost, I always think it's interesting to go back to what originally drew you into physical therapy in the first place. And what did you love the most when you were working as a clinician?
Yeah, I loved the relationships that I was able to build with patients. I loved feeling like I could make a difference in people's lives. Those were some of the biggest things that early on I really enjoyed as a clinician.
Definitely. What about just getting into the field in general? Was this something you knew when you were a kid, or was it a realization you had as you got a little older? How did that happen?
Yeah, I think when I was in college, I knew that it was either going to be PT school or med school. And I actually had the opportunity as part of one of my observation, hours, if you will, to be able to watch an ACL surgery. And that was fascinating to watch. But I remember being in the OR and thinking to myself, while this is so cool, I miss the patient interaction. That was the one piece of the puzzle that I kind of felt like, having done my observation hours and then seeing that surgery, that was the piece of the puzzle that I realized I liked as much as I did. And so that's kind of when I don't want to say the door closed to pursuing med school, but that's when it really became much more apparent that PT was more the route.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. This was in high school? Was that what this observation experience was? Is it more college?
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. That's amazing. I feel like, speaking as a PT myself too, it's that level of kind of longer term connection, that rapport you get. Similarly, I've observed surgeries too, and it's that. It's they're unconscious. They're not there. You're helping them totally. It's very important, but that connection you build is with a patient and seeing them kind of go through what they're going through, and you're directly a part of it is I think pretty unique to what we do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So when you're during your years as PT, and forgive me, but are you currently practicing, or you're running your business full time now? No patient care?
Just running my business, no patient care.
Love it. Love it. So during your years as a PT, what do you feel like gave you the deepest insight into how therapy teams work, into how healthcare organizations function? What do you think gave you that insight?
I think working as a home health clinician versus like my time in outpatient really gave me that perspective because you're not only, you're working with more so of a multidisciplinary team than you are when you're in outpatient, but also you are still having contact with, skilled nursing facilities, discharge planners, physicians, and talking about patients' discharges home. I mean, there's so many more layers when you're in home health, and there's so many more opportunities to speak to other members within your team, but also other members within other healthcare teams as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes perfect sense. So for our listeners, do you mind just kind of walking us through like what was your career process like when you first got out of school? Was it just immediately right into home health, or did you kind of transition through several different areas?
Yeah, that's a great question. I started out in outpatient, and while I loved it, I ended up moving out of the area. And as I was job searching, I, was a little bit open minded to just, is it going to be outpatient again? Is it going to be home health? I did some observation hours in home health when I was back in undergrad. And I remember thinking, like, I would never want to do this.
Yeah.
And so I kind of, had a little bit of a different perspective after going through school and being a clinician. And I ended up taking a home health position kind of on a whim, a little bit of I'm either going to love it or I'm going to hate it. And I actually ended up absolutely loving home care. There were still pieces of outpatient that I do miss. I miss with outpatient the puzzle that you get to solve in a way with patients. But
Yeah.
being in home care too, like there's still some pluses. You're really making an impact on people's daily lives too.
Definitely. It's kind of funny, right? When you're in school and like understanding what you want to do, like I feel like almost every PT I talk to has some story where they're like, actually, it was amazing. I'm inpatient or wound care or something like that. Where you're like,
Right.
wow, I never would have thought I wanted to do that.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's amazing. At what point, in your career, did you start realizing that you might want a career path maybe outside of the traditional setting?
It kind of got realized for me,
Hmm.
actually.
Oh,
Um, yeah, I always said I would never run my own business. I always said I would never like do something like this. I just, I enjoyed being a clinician, maybe go into management, but doing something on my own was something that I literally always said I would not do.
hmm.
I ended up, I'm ironically a PT with a back injury. And so I had two pretty substantial surgeries back in 2019. I had a disc replacement and then a fusion thereafter. And so both lumbar surgeries, and kind of snuck the last one in before COVID ironically happened, not knowing. But
Yeah.
it was at that point where I knew I couldn't go back to patient care just because of my surgeries. And then
Oh,
with COVID happening on top of that, I was kind of at a place where I just needed to figure something out. And that's when I
yeah.
started to go down the rabbit hole of like, what other options might there be? And it was an interesting time because so many people were also looking into like, what else can I possibly do right now? But mine was
Yeah.
more of a forced, you cannot go back to like patient care. So that's kind of how I, stumbled into this.
Wow. Wow. What a story. I mean, like that's quite like career changing, like the trajectory of your career
Mhm.
is just changing because of that experience. You mentioned, which I think would be interesting to talk about, is how you're saying that you were like, I would never initially, you were thinking I would never start my own business, have my own practice, you know, go down that entrepreneurial route. Is there a particular reason, just out of curiosity? 'Cause I'm sure other people listening, other potential entrepreneurs listening, honestly probably felt the same way at some point.
Mhm.
And so is there a particular reason why you felt that way?
I think I just didn't want the headache. Um,
Yeah.
and I think too, when you work in home health, you have a lot of autonomy. And so you kind of think like, well, I have all this autonomy. Why would I take on the headache of starting something on my own? I think that's where some of those thoughts came from. And
Makes
when I
sense.
was working in outpatient, I was still so green that, a year out, I mean, that those thoughts weren't really crossing my mind of like, oh, I would think that I would want to start something. So it was more so a little bit further down the line when, I was in home health and kind of thinking like I would just that none of that would interest me. Like I'm content, I'm happy. I enjoy the autonomy, I enjoy where I'm working, all of those kind of led to those thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that makes the first thing you said was like, you didn't want to deal with the headache. Like, that's a good enough reason as any. It's
Right.
like, that's fair. It's tough,
Mhm.
and it can be daunting for sure. I guess specifically recruiting, how did the recruiting first enter the picture for you? Like how did that start?
Yeah, in that COVID time of like just trying to figure out what other options there were, that was one that kind of sparked my interest a little bit. There were other options that I looked into, and they felt like they would be checking a box versus something I enjoyed. And so that's when I kind of started to look a little bit more into, okay, well, I mean, I think I could do this. I
Yeah.
didn't really know what it entailed, and I didn't really understand totally, because as PTs, when you go through school, you don't really go through much in terms of like sales. You don't really go through much in terms of entrepreneurial like piece of the puzzle either. And
Yeah.
so that's, I started to kind of think a little bit more like, okay, I don't really know exactly what I'm getting into, but on the surface, I think I could do it.
Yeah. I mean, had you had experience in something similar prior to jumping into recruiting? Like in a sense, like maybe hiring, somewhere in the hiring process or anything, or was this kind of like you're super fresh? I don't know much about it, but it seems like something I can do.
Super fresh. Kind of felt like, okay, there's, and I was more so looking into they call it allied recruiting, which is, not, it kind of gets divided nursing versus allied. And so
Right.
I was looking more so into the allied side, kind of thinking like, well, I was a clinician. I have worked at these places. That's got to count for something, right?
Totally. I mean, hey, this seems like a good enough reason or a good enough like skill set, compared to anything else, I mean, you're
Mhm.
directly worked in that space, Like, who knows about it more than you, you know?
Right. Hmm.
So, I mean, this goes kind of in line with that, but like, what do you think, like in your particular background as a PT back then, did you feel was going to translate directly into recruiting?
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things that I learned early on, and ironically in recruiting, is people looked at me. I got told no. I can't tell you how many times, over
Yeah.
and over again. And people were, their response was just, you don't have the experience. And I remember thinking, like, I hear you, but I also feel like I bring something to the table that would be of value.
Yeah.
And I had to learn to be able to articulate what about having your DPT translates. And I think that there's a few things. And I think that one of the things I've learned being a recruiter, you have to essentially connect those dots for people.
Yeah.
That you can't assume that they get it or they understand how your degree can translate into something else. And I think some of it is just like the grind of PT school. You can't replicate that. You can't replace, the work that goes in. I think to the ability to have conversations and interview patients, you're using those same skills when I'm talking with other PTs as well. So those like interview skills are very important. And then I think to, just the ability to think on your feet, those all translate very well.
Yeah. I mean, makes perfect sense. I mean, it sounds like, what you're saying is like, give us PT some credit. Like we know,
Right.
we know how to
Mhm.
do things, I
Mhm.
mean, like you said, I mean, I think so much of it sounds like that your thought process and like journey through this is like, okay, fall back on what you know. Like I know how to interview
Mhm.
patients. I know how to build a relationship within 20 minutes of meeting them, right? Like that's all stuff
Mhm.
that not many people know how to do just naturally in their job, like and PTs have that, so good,
Mhm.
really good on you for falling back on that, noticing that, seeing that. What about like what fears or concerns, uncertainties did you have? And it sounds like, you kind of, like you mentioned, it wasn't fully your choice necessarily to go in, stop treating and go into the recruiting side, like it's a physical health concern. But what fears or concerns did you have about leaving the clinical space and doing the recruiting full time?
I think I was just unsure of how fulfilling it would be. Um,
Yeah,
that was a concern. That was something that some of the other like non-clinical areas that I looked into didn't check that box, and I turned down offers for other positions because I at the end of the day felt like this, I mean, it's going to check a box of employment, but am I going to really be happy? And so I felt like, recruiting could be a little bit more interactive. You're not just like
yeah,
staring at a computer screen all day.
for sure.
And so that was one piece that I felt like, okay, I anticipate missing this, but I think I could kind of get part of it back in a way.
Yeah, beautifully put. I mean, I think I mean, you looking back on when you got into healthcare in the first place, that piece of like there's a purpose associated with what you're doing, right? It's like there's like a
Mhm.
feeling. You're like, oh, this is great. I get to help people. I get to do whatever, in their journey to make them feel better. It's daunting maybe to be venturing into something else that doesn't have a direct feeling like that as strong as patient
Mhm.
care. The In the beginning when you first got into recruiting, how did you actually like start to learn the business side of things, like sales, outreach, client development, recruiting in general? Was it just experience or was there more to it than that?
Some of it was trial and error. A lot of it was thinking to myself, okay, I've been hit up by recruiters many times. I'm sure you have
True.
too.
Yeah.
And you kind of, in your head, you kind of know what translates and what doesn't. What types of messages do get sent to you that you automatically just trash or
Totally.
automatically goes, just on red and you're not ever going to deal with it again. And so I tried to think and really put myself in the candidate's shoes, being a previous candidate, and
Yeah.
think what's going to translate, what's not going to translate. And I tried not to listen to some of the like industry noise of being super salesy and being a certain way, and just tried to lean into if I'm putting myself in the shoes of somebody who I'm trying to reach out to, what does that look like?
Yeah. I mean, that's and you mentioned this as well and are alluding to it, but it's like I think one of the biggest skills we have as PTs is that empathy side of things, right? Like, can I see it from their
Mhm.
perspective and understand it so that I can help them? And that, I mean, connecting the dots right there. I mean, that's essentially what you're saying. When you're like, what does it look like from their point of view to receive an email, to receive a LinkedIn message that you get 100 of them in a week? Like how does mine differentiate? Um, that's amazing. The Looking back, like with Golden Recruiting, what do you feel like helped you the most build credibility, get momentum with like clients early on?
Yeah, I hired a business coach early on. I felt like, I can do some of this on my own, but I didn't know what I didn't know. And so
Yeah,
that was something I would encourage, like, if anybody's ever thinking about, you have to have somebody in your corner, especially when you're in a new space. Like that was very important to me to have somebody
yeah,
kind of helping drive the ship, helping me understand an industry that I was still very green in. So that's been instrumental. I think that was a big piece of it. And I think too, trying to tune out the noise of what the rest of the industry is like and just try to
yeah,
stay true to myself. Those were some of the huge things that, again, I just kept thinking there's there's got to be a more relational way to do this than necessarily the spam messages that we all, have received, and the canned, outreach, and just
Yeah.
the stuff that just kind of falls flat on the page.
Totally, totally. I mean, you're speaking on it as we go along here, like your unique approach at Golden Recruiting and how you approach recruiting. It sounds like you've taken a different approach, or at least tried to. How do you feel like, if you could tell us, your approach differs than maybe a typical recruiter approach?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is I try not to be salesy. That's my
Mm,
biggest, if I were to describe it in like one line, if you will, my approach is trying not to be salesy.
yeah,
My goal is to, find out from candidates what they're looking for. My goal is for, there to be a long-term match, whether it's with the organization that I'm representing or whether it's with, for them, a different position. And I tell every candidate, hey, at the end of the day, like, the goal is for you to find the right fit, whether it's this, whether it's that, it doesn't matter to me. And so that's the approach that I try to take. I try to, really lean in on transparency throughout the hiring process, from both like the client perspective and the candidate perspective.
yeah,
And my goal is really just to put all the pieces in front of a candidate and allow them to make their own decisions.
yeah. Um, that makes perfect sense, in the sense of like how, in that beginning, right? Like you said, like you get a bunch of spam messaging. Uh, we all get those. How do you feel like in that first even message you're doing that? How are you setting yourself apart in that way?
I think being very intentional about A, who I'm reaching out to,
Yeah.
B, the messaging, those are things that go a long way, a lot further than people might think. Um,
Yeah.
spray and pray is not, doesn't really, I mean, some people find success from that, but again, I have found that the more likely to get a long-term fit, there does have to be a little bit of a different approach.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking on intention, like you talk about long-term fit with the client, but also with the potential candidate. Is
Yes,
that correct?
correct. Mhm, yep,
And is
that's
that just
something
is
that
go on. Yeah, sorry.
oh, yeah, no, that's something that we talk about with both the candidate and the client, and it's something that, you know, it's instrumental because nothing's more expensive than having to repeat that process again X amount of months or a year down the line, right? And
Sure.
so my goal for both parties is that it's a good fit, it feels like the right fit, and overall, it's really something that I think the turnover early on in our industry, I think people have started to see, and I get it. Sometimes it's people kind of figuring out as a PT, like what setting works for you, but trying to, reduce their turnover early on.
100%. I mean, yeah, I mean, the retention is a constant process. And it starts with your role 100%. Like the right person, the right role, expectations are aligned, all that stuff. What do you feel like are common mistakes you see organizations making when it comes to hiring?
I think trying to sell too
Mm,
much can be a very common mistake, and trying to just build off the excitement so much versus really kind of sitting down and thinking like, there's I've seen it where some places, want to talk about all the highs versus mentioning all the, the potential lows. And at
yeah,
the end of the day, in order for a candidate to stay put, you want them to have all the information on the table because they will find out,
yeah,
later on. Like, some of those pieces will surface later on down the line. And so I think some places are nervous to mention, certain parts of maybe the offer or like the downfall of whatever it might be, because let's be real, every place has a downfall.
yeah,
Or every position is, might be for somebody, but might not be for somebody else. But
yeah,
you have to allow the candidate to drive that decision.
yeah. So it being on so in my role as well, like I just have a decent amount of like exposure to this hiring process in general. Do you find that companies or clients that you're working with in recruiting, like that's a hard pill to swallow, maybe like where it's like, maybe they're like, no, everything's great here. Or are you having to like kind of mentor them and show them like, no, I mean, like this is my strategy, my process. Like we have to be able to identify like the realness of the role rather than just push to sell and hire somebody.
I think that there's a lot of organizations that might be shooting themselves in the foot and they just have no idea that they're doing it. I think that's
Yeah.
part of it. I think it could be that things have shifted in the past few years after COVID. People are not moving around as much for positions, and there's such a need for PTs right now that people, I don't want to say they're desperate because let's be frank, some of them, sometimes you are, and it just is what it is because of whatever
Yeah.
hiring situation that you're in. But the fear is that you're driving your decisions based on that desperation versus like processes and procedures that you have in place in order to make sound decisions.
For sure. For sure. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So on the flip side of that, it may just be, doing the exact opposite of what you just mentioned, but what do you feel like the strongest teams, clinics, organizations are doing when it comes to hiring and retaining? Like what maybe sets that apart, or what have you noticed?
I think they've identified their ideal candidate. That's one thing. I think they know that they're not for everyone and they accept that
Yeah.
because instead of just trying to go after a body, I think that there's a type of clinician that they're looking for, or they realize that a certain type of person would do well there versus somebody else. And so I think learning that it's okay to walk away. Again, there are reasons why like you might not want to walk away from a good candidate in front of you, right? But I think
Yeah.
early on, company wise, if you've identified your ideal candidate, if you've identified what you're willing to do to move for that ideal candidate and who you'd be willing to walk away from, that helps a lot in the process.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So you find yourself in your day-to-day doing that with organizations? Like you're like, do you help them with that process, or is it like, is it not, I guess, is it more that they're just saying, hey, this is how we need to recruit, and you're giving your advice on how you think they should? Is that kind of what it looks like?
It's a little bit of a blend of both. So, as a recruiter, if I come in and I bring candidates to the table and
Mm-hmm.
your internal processes are a cog in your wheel that's inhibiting somebody to get from the start of, to the finish line, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
then it doesn't do me any good to bring you candidates. It does me good to help fix those internal processes or help identify who you're really looking for. And so some of those kinks kind of get worked out as we go. And then there's other companies that like we talk about these things, ad nauseum in the beginning to help really identify who's the buyer for the house in that situation.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, beautifully put. I mean, that makes perfect sense, and it sounds like that's what's going along with like what maybe is differentiating you a little bit in your thought process is like trying to close those gaps and solve those issues for your organization. What about your in your role with Golden Recruiting? What does your just general day-to-day look like? Could you give our listeners like an idea of what that looks like?
Yeah, it's a lot more emails than I ever really like anticipated.
That's fair.
Yeah, yeah. So it's there's that piece of it. There's finding candidates. There's reaching out and having phone calls. There could be phone calls with prospective clients, and so there's a lot of emailing, searching, and interacting that goes on in terms of phone calls or meetings.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. So, in your day-to-day roles or day-to-day functions right now, what do you feel like? And you kind of touched on this earlier, but if you could just summarize for us too, like what skills from being a PT do you feel like has helped you the most as an entrepreneur, as someone who started your own business?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. I think like we were talking about the interview aspect of it. I think that that's been like just so important to the process. I think another thing as a PT, the ability to learn to pivot is
Mm,
something that as an entrepreneur is extremely important. And running your own, you have to be able to look about 5 steps down the line, and you have to be able to really understand the market and understand if something's working, if it's not working, how long do you bang your head against the wall before you decide to change it, or how long do you ride that wave to kind of determine, okay, is this just a phase right now? So there's a lot of you're just constantly evaluating everything that you're doing. And I think as a PT, like that's a skill, at least I feel like from PT school, I still, if I'm out on a walk and seeing how somebody's gait pattern is, like I can't help but analyze. And so
totally,
that
totally.
skill just like doesn't leave you. It just shows up in a different area, I think. And I think that that's one of the biggest, the ability to pivot and the ability to be constantly evaluating everything that you're doing.
Love that. I mean, I feel like more I talk to people that have started their own business, that echoes so true across almost everybody. It's like,
Mhm.
can you, one, like try to look ahead as best you can, right? And as a PT, that's like all you're doing. Get two clients maybe back to back. You're like, okay, what's coming after that? Then after that, then after that.
Mhm.
And then the ability to be flexible and pivot and change in the moment potentially, or at least in the short term, to fit what you need.
Mhm.
And again, like treating a patient, like they might, okay, now I'm in 7 out of 10 pain, and I wasn't on Monday when I saw you, and so
Right.
it's like, what do you do?
Mhm.
And that's hard to do. I mean, we have to do it as PTs though all the time. What do you feel like has been the hardest part of being an entrepreneur that really no one can prepare you for?
Yeah, I think there's 2 things. I think you're out on an island a little bit on your own, especially if you're a solo business owner, you're
Yeah.
definitely out on an island there. So I think that's one of the biggest things that I kind of knew going into it, but until you really feel it on the day to day, it just hits a little bit different. And that's why I think too having a business coach or somebody else to kind of not even really in an accountability partner, but just somebody else that you can constantly bounce ideas off of, or in that arena. I think that's a big help. Um, I also think one of the challenges that I kind of I did know, but it's not always on the forefront of everyone's mind. And it sounds so simple. You get out of it what you put into it, and when you come, most PT jobs are salaried or hourly.
Hmm.
I got a little taste of this in home health being a paid per visit. And so I was able to directly see, if I want to turn the faucet on, what do I have to do? But
Mhm.
that's one of the biggest, I would say, differences. And what I've heard PTs too talk about is just you get used to that constant paycheck. And, when you're running your own business, really it's exactly what you put into it is what you get out of it.
Yeah. I mean, you said it seems simple. I think that's like some simple advice is sometimes the best advice, like
Mhm.
it really is that simple. It's like you get out what you put in, you reap what you sow. Like that's makes, perfect sense. So if you were to give some advice to a clinician, maybe one that's listening now that's interested, they like want to start their own business, maybe at a similar spot as you where you're like, maybe it's not for me, initially. But they don't yet feel ready, what advice would you give them?
I It's interesting. I probably wouldn't give the good old like just go for it advice, and it's not because of like any bad experiences that I've had. I I've seen businesses fail or early on in their, I think
Yeah.
they say that there's a high percentage of businesses that fail within the first year. And so I think there's something to be said about, looking into what you want to do, really do your research, understand why you're wanting to do it. Are you wanting to do it because you think the grass is greener, it's going to be flexible working for yourself? It's not totally
Nope.
like that. And so I think if you really look at like what you want to do, look at what the market looks like for what you're thinking about doing, are there other competitors in your space? What are they doing? How are you going to differentiate yourself? I think those are all, you just kind of have to have a little bit of a grounding moment before you just decide to jump 2 feet in. And there is a time where you have to jump 2 feet in, but you want to make sure that you're not doing it blindly.
I think that's amazing advice. And again, like hearing entrepreneurs, similar people in similar spaces talk about these things, like it's definitely a mix of what people will say to something like that. It's like, sometimes it is like, maybe it's the personality. I don't know exactly, but it's like, hey, just go for it. You want it. You have a dream, you have a passion, go for it. And I think that's very sound, grounded advice for a lot of people, where it's like, get your ducks in a row, understand what what it is you're potentially signing up for, understand your market, what you really want, and then go for it. I think that's great advice. And it is probably holds true for a lot of individuals listening right now. So I guess circling it back to your company, Golden Recruiting, if you think about the future of it, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, are you year one right now? Are you just about to finish year one, or is that how long you guys have been around, or is it longer?
Yep.
So you think about the future of your company, what impact are you hoping to make in healthcare over the next several years?
I think I would just like to see the narrative around recruiting change a little bit. There can often be a negative connotation or like a bothersome, type of connotation associated with recruiters. Or, I would love to see that shift a little bit. And I would just love to be able to positively, impact the space. I know that's kind of a blanket term, but I'd just like to leave it better than I found it.
I love that. And again, like maybe you and I are the same wavelength or something. I'm like big on these like blanket, simpler terms. I think they're super profound and applicable. And also like flexible, it's like, you don't know exactly what it's going to be in the next amount of years. So you just want to accomplish this, right? This thing that you can wrap your head around, I love that. I love that. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for being here today, for talking to our listeners about your journey and about your company, and just sharing your insights in general. I think it was super helpful. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Of course, of course. And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us for this conversation with Rachel. And please join us when we're back next month for another episode of the Entrepreneurial PT. Bye-bye.
And there you have it, another dose of PT-preneurial inspiration to fuel your journey. Check out more inspiring stories from PTs and PTAs out there making waves by listening and subscribing to our podcasts on your favorite streaming platforms. And don't forget to rate and review this podcast. Thanks for listening.